Hey guys, throwaway here because this whole situation is still fresh and I need some advice. I thought my marriage was solid. My wife, Rachel, and I have been together for 9 years, married for 6. I thought we had built something unshakable until last week. It all started with a business trip. Rachel works in marketing and she had to travel to Chicago for what she claimed was a big client pitch. It wasn't out of the ordinary. Her job often required travel, and I never thought much of it. She was charismatic, smart, and great at her job. But something felt off this time. For starters, she was weirdly distant before she left. Normally, she'd pepper me with kisses and hug me goodbye like she wouldn't see me for a year. But that morning, she barely looked at me. When I asked if something was wrong, she snapped, "Don't be so clingy. I'll be back before you know it." Ouch! I chalked it up to stress. But then she started posting on her Instagram story photos of swanky cocktails and rooftop views, none of which looked like the kind of places you'd go to prepare for a pitch. When I commented on one, asking if it was work-related, she left me on read. That night, she texted me, "Don't wait up for me, working late." I wanted to believe her, but something gnawed at me. So I did what I've never done before. I opened her laptop, and there it was. A message popped up in her iMessage app from someone named Jake. It read, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait for round 2 tonight." I felt my stomach drop. I didn't know who Jake was, but I knew damn well what that message meant. I spent the next hour scrolling through their texts. The conversations were flirty, sexual, and filled with lies about me. She called our marriage stale and told him I wouldn't even notice if she disappeared for a week. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront her? Wait for her to come back and pretend everything was fine? Instead, I went down a rabbit hole, replaying every interaction we'd had over the past few months, questioning what was real and what was fake. And that's where I am now. She's due back tomorrow, and I have no idea how to approach this. I feel like my world just got turned upside down. Do I confront her immediately? Do I gather more evidence? And more importantly, how do I even begin to process that the woman I thought I'd spend my life with has been lying to me? I feel so lost. Any advice would be appreciated. Rachel came back the next day, and let me tell you, I've never felt more like a stranger in my own home. She walked in like nothing had happened, setting her suitcase down and giving me a quick kiss on the cheek, an obligation more than affection. "Miss me?" she said with a smirk. I wanted to scream, but instead I played it cool. "How was the trip?" I asked, trying not to let the tension in my voice give me away. She shrugged. "Oh, the usual. Meetings, pitches, blah blah. You know how it is." She barely looked at me, heading straight for the fridge to grab a bottle of water. It was the kind of dismissive attitude I'd been noticing for months, but now it had a sinister edge. I wasn't paranoid anymore. I had proof, but I needed to hear her say it. "So who's Jake?" I asked casually, leaning against the counter. Her entire body froze, water bottle halfway to her lips. For a moment, I thought she might play dumb. "What are you talking about?" she finally said, her voice a little too calm. I stared at her, trying to keep my voice steady. "I saw the messages, Rachel. On your laptop." The way her face shifted was almost impressive. A flicker of shock, then anger, then a mask of indifference. "You went through my messages?" She spat, like that was the real crime here. "Don't turn this around on me," I said, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me, Rachel. Who the hell is Jake?" She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "It's not what you think," she said, which, of course, is what every cheater says. "Jake is just a friend." "A friend?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "A friend you sleep with?" Because from what I read, you two had quite the time in Chicago. At this point, she switched tactics, going from defensive to dismissive. "Oh, come on, Tom," she said. "It was just a fling. It didn't mean anything. Just a fling." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Like our marriage, my love for her, was some joke. "You call this a fling?" I said, my voice shaking. "You lied to me. You betrayed me. And now you're trying to downplay it like it's nothing?" She sighed like I was the one overreacting. "Look, things haven't been great between us for a while. I needed, I don't know, excitement. It's not like I planned for this to happen." "Excitement?" I snapped. "If things were so bad, Why didn't you talk to me? Or leave me? Instead, you run off to Chicago and screw some guy while I'm here, thinking you're working your ass off? Her eyes narrowed, and for a second, she looked genuinely angry. You think you're some perfect husband, Tom? You work late. You barely notice me anymore. Don't act like you're blameless in this. And there it was, the gaslighting, the blame shifting, as if her betrayal was somehow my fault. You're unbelievable, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You don't even feel guilty, do you? She sighed dramatically, throwing up her hands. What do you want me to say, Tom? That I'm sorry? Fine. I'm sorry. Okay. But I can't undo it. So what do you want me to do? What I wanted was for this whole nightmare to not be real. For her to be the woman I thought I married. But instead, I was standing in front of a stranger who didn't seem to care that she'd just shattered my entire world. I want a divorce, I said, the words coming out before I could second-guess myself. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, she looked genuinely shocked. What? Tom, don't be ridiculous. I'm not being ridiculous, Rachel. I deserve better than this. I deserve better than you. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just stood there, staring at me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I'll be staying at a hotel tonight, I said, grabbing my car keys. Take some time to think about where you want to go from here, because I'm done. And with that, I walked out, leaving her standing in the kitchen with nothing but the weight of her choices to keep her company. The hotel room was cold and sterile, but it felt like the safest place in the world after the chaos of that confrontation. I couldn't believe the words, I want a divorce, had actually come out of my mouth. It felt surreal. I spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, replaying everything Rachel had said. How casually she called it just a fling. How she had the audacity to try and blame me for her betrayal. When I woke up, my phone was flooded with texts and missed calls from her. At first, I ignored them. I needed space to think, to figure out my next steps. But her messages ranged from apologies to outright accusations, like she couldn't decide whether to beg for my forgiveness or guilt-trip me into coming back. Some highlights. Tom, I'm sorry. Please don't throw everything away over one mistake. I can't believe you're overreacting like this. You're being so dramatic. Are you really willing to ruin our marriage over something so insignificant? Insignificant. That word stuck with me. It was as if the vows we took, the years we spent building a life together, meant nothing to her. Later that afternoon, she called, and against my better judgment, I picked up. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. Tom, we need to talk. Please come home. I wanted to tell her there was nothing left to say, but I agreed. Not because I thought we could fix things, but because I needed closure. I couldn't move forward without looking her in the eye one last time. When I walked into the house, Rachel was sitting on the couch, looking a mess. Hair unkempt, face puffy from crying. For a split second, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I reminded myself, I didn't do this. She did. She launched into an apology, tears streaming down her face. Tom, I was stupid. I wasn't thinking. I got caught up in something meaningless. But I love you. I never stopped loving you. I let her speak, though her words felt hollow. When she was done, I asked the question that had been eating at me since I first saw those messages. Why, Rachel? Why did you do it? She hesitated, looking down at her hands. I don't know, she whispered. Igusi used. I needed to feel wanted. Are you serious? I said, my voice rising. You're telling me you didn't feel wanted by me? After everything we've built together? Her eyes darted up to meet mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of shame. It wasn't about you, Tom. It was about me. I was insecure, okay? Jake made me feel alive. Alive? I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. You destroyed our marriage because you wanted a damn ego boost? She didn't answer. She just started crying harder, muttering apologies that I was too numb to absorb. I'm filing for divorce, I said, finally breaking the silence. You can cry, you can apologize, you can say whatever you want, but I'm done. Tom, please, she sobbed, grabbing my hand. I made a mistake. Don't throw this away. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes. But it was too late. She didn't realize it yet, but the damage was irreversible. Something inside me had snapped the moment I read those messages. The trust, the love, the future I thought we had, it was all gone. I'm staying with a friend for now, I said, pulling my hand away. You can keep the house until we figure out the logistics. But I'm not staying here. Her sobs grew louder as I walked out the door, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for what I was losing, anger for what she'd done, and, oddly, a sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. It wouldn't include Rachel. I spent the next few days at my best friend Mike's place. He's the kind of guy who doesn't ask too many questions, which was exactly what I needed. I told him the basics. Rachel cheated, I'm done, but I couldn't bring myself to go into detail. The betrayal still felt too raw, like an open wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. The texts from Rachel kept coming, a constant reminder of the mess I was leaving behind. They swung wildly between desperate apologies and bitter accusations, as if she couldn't decide whether to win me back or punish me for leaving. One moment, she'd be sending me long paragraphs about how much she loved me, and the next she'd fire off a curt, "You're being so petty." I ignored most of them, but one message caught my attention. I told Jake it's over. He meant nothing to me. It made me laugh out loud, an actual, bitter laugh that startled even me. Did she really think breaking things off with him would fix this? Like somehow that would undo the lies, the betrayal, the months she spent sneaking around? Mike must have noticed the change in my mood because he asked, "You sure you're ready to go through with this? Divorce isn't easy, man." "Easy?" I said, shaking my head. "There's nothing easy about any of this. But staying with her? That'd be even harder." He nodded, clinking his beer bottle against mine. "Good. Then stop reading her texts. It's just gonna mess with your head." He was right. I blocked her number that night. If she needed to talk, she could go through my lawyer. The next step was finding a divorce attorney. It felt surreal, sitting in a stranger's office and recounting the details of my crumbling marriage. The attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Karen, listened intently, taking notes as I spoke. "Do you have proof of the affair?" she asked. I nodded. "Screenshots of their messages." "Good," she said. "That'll help. We'll file for irreconcilable differences, but having evidence always strengthens your position. Are you prepared for this to get messy?" Messy. The word hung in the air like a dark cloud. I thought about Rachel's tears, her pleas, and how quickly those could turn into anger once she realized I wasn't coming back. But I also thought about the messages, about Jake, about the way she dismissed our marriage like it was nothing. Yeah, I said finally, I'm prepared. A week later, I went back to the house to grab my things. Rachel wasn't home. I'd made sure of that, but being there felt suffocating. Every room was filled with memories, tainted now by what I knew. The couch where we used to cuddle during movie nights. The kitchen where we'd cook together, laughing as we inevitably burned something. The bedroom, well, I didn't even go in there. I couldn't. As I packed, I noticed a framed photo of us on the dresser. It was from our honeymoon in Maui, both of us grinning like we didn't have a care in the world. For a moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia, a desperate longing for the life we used to have. But then I remembered Jake and the texts, and the feeling vanished. I left the photo behind. Later that night, I got an email from Rachel. It was long, so long I almost didn't read it, but curiosity got the better of me. She apologized again, saying she was lost and confused and didn't realize how much she'd been hurting me. She begged for another chance, promising to go to therapy, to do whatever it took to rebuild my trust. The email ended with a line that stopped me cold. "You're the love of my life, Tom. I didn't realize it until I lost you." I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling for a long time. There was a time when hearing those words would have meant everything to me. Now, they felt empty, like they were coming from a stranger. Rachel might have realized too late that I was the love of her life. But I was beginning to realize she wasn't mine anymore. After Rachel's email, something inside me clicked. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not at her, not at Jake, not even at myself for believing in something that had clearly been unraveling for a long time. Instead, I felt this strange, quiet clarity. I had a choice to make, and for the first time in weeks, I knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted to let go. That didn't mean it was easy. Over the next few weeks, the logistics of separating our lives became a full-time job. Rachel tried to reach out through mutual friends, but I made it clear that all communication had to go through my lawyer. The more distance I put between us, the more I realized how toxic things had been, not just since the affair, but long before. I'd been blind to it. I'd convinced myself that the occasional coldness, the subtle dismissiveness, was just part of the ebb and flow of marriage. But looking back, I could see the cracks had been forming for years. One evening, I went to dinner with Mike and his girlfriend, Sarah. It was the first time I'd done something social since everything went down, and I wasn't sure how I'd feel. But halfway through the night, I realized I was okay. I laughed at Mike's dumb jokes, chatted with Sarah about her new job, and for a couple of hours, I didn't think about Rachel at all. When I got home, there was another email waiting for me. This one was shorter, more desperate. Tom, I'm begging you. Please don't throw this away. I love you. I'll do anything. Just tell me what I need to do. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a split second, I considered replying. I could tell her how much she'd hurt me, how her betrayal had shattered the life we built. I could lay out all the ways she'd let me down, make her feel every ounce of the pain she'd caused. But what would that accomplish? I didn't need her to understand. I didn't need her to hurt the way I had. What I needed was to move on. So I closed the email without responding. And for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. A few days later, Rachel's lawyer reached out with a counterproposal to the divorce terms. She wanted the house. That didn't surprise me. I had already decided I didn't want it. Too many memories lived in those walls, and I wanted a fresh start. I agreed without a fight. I didn't need the house. I didn't need anything that tied me to her. I had already started looking for apartments in a different part of the city, someplace new, someplace that didn't feel like ours. By the time we signed the papers, Rachel was a mess. She cried through most of the meeting, telling me over and over again that she was sorry. Her lawyer had to step in at one point, gently suggesting that she take a moment to compose herself. I sat there, stone-faced, waiting for it to be over. When it was done, she looked at me one last time, her eyes filled with tears. "Tom, I'll never stop loving you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Then I walked out of the room, out of the courthouse, and out of her life. That night, I opened a bottle of whiskey Mike had given me as a congrats on escaping hell gift. I sat on the floor of my new, half-furnished apartment, sipping from the glass and staring at the city lights through the window. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not happy, not yet, but free. I had spent so long trying to hold on to a marriage that was already gone, fighting for someone who wasn't fighting for me. Letting go wasn't easy, but it was the only choice I could live with. Rachel was right about one thing. I had been the love of her life, but she wasn't mine anymore, and I was finally okay with that. Life after Rachel wasn't easy, but it was mine. The first few weeks in my new apartment were quiet, almost too quiet. For years, my life had been filled with her. Her laugh, her voice, her presence in every corner of the house. Now, it was just me, and that was an adjustment I hadn't been prepared for. But the silence brought clarity. It forced me to sit with myself, to confront who I was outside of being Rachel's husband. I started to notice things I hadn't before. How much I loved waking up early and reading with my coffee. How I'd stopped listening to music because Rachel thought my playlists were too weird. How I hadn't been to a baseball game in years because she found them boring. So I bought a ticket to a game. Just one for me. It was weird at first, being surrounded by strangers while I cheered for a team I hadn't thought about in ages. But by the seventh inning, I was grinning like a kid, shouting at the umpire and high-fiving the guy next to me after a home run. It felt good, better than I expected. One evening, Mike dragged me out to a bar with a group of friends. I wasn't thrilled about it. I wasn't exactly in the mood to make small talk, but he insisted. You can't mope forever, he said. At least let me buy you a drink. The bar was packed, loud with music and laughter. I sat in the corner nursing a beer, half listening to Mike's stories, when I noticed a woman sitting alone at the bar. She was scribbling in a notebook, oblivious to the chaos around her. Something about her caught my attention, not just her striking red hair, but the way she seemed so comfortable in her own world. Mike noticed me looking and nudged my arm. Go talk to her. You're right, I said, shaking my head. I'm not ready for that. You're never going to be ready, he replied. Just say hi. What's the worst that could happen? I laughed, but after a few minutes, I found myself walking over. My heart was pounding in my chest as I tapped her on the shoulder. Hey, sorry to interrupt. What are you working on? She looked up surprised but smiled. Just some notes for a screenplay I'm working on. Nothing too exciting. A writer? Huh? That's impressive, I said, suddenly feeling like an idiot for not having something cooler to say. But she laughed, closing her notebook. Depends on who you ask. I'm Emma, by the way. Tom, I said, shaking her hand. Can I buy you a drink, Emma? She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Sure, why not? We talked for hours that night about her screenplay, her love of old movies, how she'd moved to the city a few months ago and was still getting used to the chaos. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about Rachel or the divorce or the life I'd left behind. I was just present. When the bar started to empty out, Emma scribbled her number on a napkin and handed it to me. Call me sometime, she said with a smile. I watched her leave, the napkin clutched in my hand like a lifeline. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't expected, hope. The next day, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the napkin. Part of me wondered if it was too soon, if I was setting myself up for failure by jumping into something new. But another part of me, the part that had felt alive for the first time in years, told me to take the chance. So I picked up my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. Hey, Emma, I said, my voice steady. It's Tom. You free for coffee this weekend? Her laughter on the other end of the line was enough to make my chest feel a little lighter. I'd like that, she said. It wasn't love at first sight, and it wasn't some grand, sweeping romance. But it was real. Over the next few weeks, Emma and I started to build something new, something built on honesty and respect, without the weight of betrayal or broken promises. Rachel had been my past, and for a long time, I thought she'd be my future too. But sitting across from Emma, watching her laugh at one of my dumb jokes, I realized my future was still unwritten. And for the first time, I was okay with that. While I was finding my footing in this new chapter of my life, Rachel was losing hers. I hadn't blocked her email. Part of me felt it wasn't necessary, but now I was reconsidering. Her messages became increasingly frantic, shifting from apologies to anger to thinly veiled attempts to manipulate me. One email stood out. The subject line read, "Please, just one more chance." I hesitated before opening it. Curiosity got the better of me, and when I read the contents, my stomach twisted. She wrote about how she'd been going to therapy, how she'd finally realized how much she had taken me for granted. She claimed she'd changed, that she now understood what she'd lost and couldn't bear to let me go. I love you, Tom, she wrote. You're the only person I've ever truly loved. Jake was a mistake, a stupid lapse in judgment. Please, can we meet? Just to talk? I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. Her words were desperate, but they didn't move me the way they once might have. It wasn't that I didn't believe she regretted her actions. I did. But regret wasn't enough. Trust couldn't be rebuilt on words alone, and I no longer had the desire to try. Instead of replying, I forwarded the email to my lawyer with a simple note, for documentation purposes. A few days later, she sent another email, this one angrier. You're really not even going to respond? After everything we've been through? I know I messed up, but you're throwing away years of love because of one mistake. You're just going to run off and start over like I never existed? Is that who you are now? For a brief moment, her words stung. Was I being cruel? Was I abandoning her in her darkest hour? But then I remembered I didn't abandon her. She abandoned me the moment she chose to betray our marriage. The guilt she was trying to lay at my feet didn't belong to me. I hit delete. The final blow came when Rachel showed up at my new apartment unannounced. I was just getting back from a run when I saw her sitting on the steps, clutching a coffee cup like it was the only thing tethering her to the ground. My heart sank. I wasn't ready for this confrontation, but it seemed she wasn't giving me a choice. "Tom," she said, standing as I approached. I needed to see you. Please." I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "What do you want, Rachel?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I want you. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to fix. But I love you. I never stopped loving you. Can't we at least try?" It was strange seeing her like this, vulnerable, broken, a shadow of the woman I once knew. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the love I used to have for her. But it was like looking at an old photograph, faded and distant, a memory of something that no longer existed. "I'm sorry, Rachel," I said, my voice steady. "But we're done. I've moved on. You need to do the same." Her face crumpled, and for a second I thought she might argue. But instead, she just nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. "I know," I said, "but that doesn't change what happened." She left without another word, and as I watched her walk away, I felt a strange sense of relief. This chapter of my life was finally closing, and I was ready to let it go. That evening, I called Emma. We hadn't been seeing each other for very long, but there was something about her that made me feel grounded, like I could breathe again. When she picked up, I told her about Rachel's visit, about how I'd finally closed the door on that part of my life. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "Yeah," I said, smiling to myself. "I think I am." With Rachel firmly in the past, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. It wasn't just about moving on. It was about rediscovering who I was. I signed up for a woodworking class, something I'd always wanted to try, but never got around to. I started running more regularly, using those early mornings to clear my mind and focus on the present. For the first time in years, I was living for myself, not for someone else. Emma became a bright spot in all of it. Our relationship was still new, and I was cautious about jumping in too quickly, but she had this way of making everything feel lighter. She didn't press me about Rachel or the divorce, but she listened when I felt like talking. More than anything, she reminded me that life could still be good, even after heartbreak. One Saturday, we went on a hike together, something she loved and I was learning to enjoy. As we reached the summit, she turned to me and said, "You're smiling a lot more these days." I hadn't realized it until she pointed it out. "I guess I have a lot more to smile about," I said. It was true. The weight that had been crushing me for so long was finally lifting. I still had moments of doubt, flashes of anger or sadness, but they were becoming fewer and farther between. With each passing day, I felt more like myself, stronger, more resilient, more hopeful. Meanwhile, Rachel tried reaching out a few more times. A couple of emails, a voicemail I didn't bother listening to. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, who assured me we were on track to finalize the divorce. Her attempts to pull me back into her orbit felt less like temptations and more like echoes, fading into the background as I moved forward. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Tuesday morning. I went to the courthouse alone, signed the papers, and walked out into the drizzle feeling relieved. Not happy, not sad, just relieved. It was over. That chapter of my life was officially closed. That evening, I met Mike for drinks to mark the occasion. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking mine against his. Emma and I kept things slow, but it was clear early on that there was something special between us. She wasn't just someone I was dating. She was someone I could see a future with. She didn't fill the void Rachel had left. She helped me see that I didn't need to fill it at all. I could be whole on my own, and anything else was just a bonus. One night, as we sat on my couch watching a movie, she turned to me and asked, "Do you ever regret how things ended with Rachel?" It was a question I hadn't really let myself think about. But as I looked at Emma, at the life I was building, the answer came easily. "No," I said. "I think it ended exactly the way it needed to." She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. "I'm glad." So was I. As life moved on for me, I heard bits and pieces about Rachel through mutual friends. It wasn't that I sought out information. I wasn't interested in keeping tabs on her, but in the way small towns or tight-knit social circles work, word inevitably gets back. Apparently, things hadn't gone well for her after the divorce. Jake, the guy she'd risked everything for, had ghosted her shortly after she broke things off with him. It didn't surprise me. He was the kind of man who thrived on the thrill of sneaking around, not on commitment or real relationships. Without me as a safety net, Rachel seemed lost. One mutual friend mentioned seeing her at a bar one night, drinking alone. She asked about you, they said, almost apologetically, as if I might care. She said she regrets everything, that she wishes she could take it all back. I didn't say much in response, just nodded and changed the subject. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I just didn't care. Rachel's regret was her burden to bear, not mine. I'd carried enough of it for both of us already. A few weeks later, Rachel sent one final email. The subject line simply read, "I'm sorry." I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I even wanted to read it. But curiosity won out, and I clicked. "Tom, I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness, and I don't expect you to respond to this. But I need you to know how deeply sorry I am for everything I did to you. I've spent the past few months trying to understand why I did what I did, and all I can say is that I was selfish and insecure. I took you for granted, and I destroyed the best thing I ever had. You were everything I could have ever wanted, and I threw it away because I didn't appreciate what I had until it was gone. I see that now. I just hope someday you can think of me and not feel anger or pain. You deserve all the happiness in the world, Tom. I'm so sorry for not being the person you deserved. Take care, Rachel." Asterisk, asterisk, I read it twice, then closed my laptop. Her words were heartfelt, and maybe even sincere, but they didn't change anything. They didn't undo the pain, the betrayal, the loss. They didn't change the fact that I had found peace without her. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Later that night, I sat on the balcony of my apartment with Emma. We weren't doing anything special, just sipping wine and watching the city lights. But it felt significant, somehow a quiet moment of clarity, of gratitude. "I got an email from Rachel today," I said suddenly. Emma looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Yeah. What did she say?" "She apologized, said she regrets everything and hopes I can forgive her." Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you?" I thought about it, really thought about it. Forgiveness had been a heavy, elusive concept for so long. But in that moment, I realized it wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think I do. Not for her, but for me." Emma smiled, her hand finding mine. "Good." And it was good, because in forgiving Rachel, I wasn't excusing her actions or inviting her back into my life. I was letting go of the last remnants of anger and hurt. I was making space for something better. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Months passed, and Rachel's email became a distant memory. It wasn't something I dwelled on, and for the first time in years, I realized my thoughts weren't tethered to the past. My life was finally my own, and it was fuller than it had been in a long time. Emma and I had continued seeing each other, and while we were still taking things slow, it felt like we were building something real. She wasn't just someone I spent time with. She was someone who understood me in a way that felt effortless, natural. For the first time, love didn't feel like work. It felt like coming home. One afternoon, I ran into Rachel by chance. I was at a coffee shop I didn't normally visit, picking up an order for Mike, when I saw her sitting by the window. She looked different. Not bad, just subdued, like the vibrant, confident woman I once knew had dimmed a little. She noticed me, too, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then she gave a small wave, a tentative smile. I considered pretending I hadn't seen her, but something in her expression stopped me. I walked over to her table. "Rachel," I said, nodding. "Tom," she replied, her voice soft. "Hi." An awkward silence stretched between us before she gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Do you want to sit?" Part of me wanted to decline, to keep the distance I'd worked so hard to maintain. But another part of me, the part that had found peace, knew there was no harm in facing her one last time. So I sat. "How have you been?" she asked, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "I'm doing well," I said honestly. "What about you?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "I'm figuring things out. Therapy's helping. Work's been steady. It's been a lot of reflecting." I nodded, unsure of what to say. There was a time when I thought I'd never be able to face her without anger or pain. But sitting across from her now, all I felt was a quiet detachment. She was no longer the woman I loved, no longer the woman who hurt me. She was just someone I used to know. "I'm glad you're doing better," I said finally. She looked down, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Tom, I meant what I said in the email. I really am sorry. For everything." "I know," I said, my tone gentle but firm. "And I forgive you." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. "You do?" "Yeah," I said, "but that doesn't change anything. We're both better off going our separate ways." She nodded slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. "I understand. I hope you're happy." "I am," I said, standing up. "And I hope you find happiness too, Rachel. Take care of yourself." She didn't try to stop me as I walked away. When I glanced back, she was staring out the window, her reflection lost in the rain-streaked glass. That night, I told Emma about the encounter. She listened quietly, her hand resting on mine as I recounted the conversation. "How do you feel about it?" she asked when I was done. "Free," I said. It felt like closure, like the last page of a chapter I've been trying to finish for years. She smiled, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I'm glad." So was I.